By late February 2009, James Donovan had made his decision. The man who once constructed homes with precision and care now prepared to destroy the two people who had shattered his life. On the night of March 3, 2009, James stood under the dim lights of a construction site, gazing at the skeletal frame of what would soon be a family home. The cold night air carried a silence that mirrored the calm he felt inside. He had planned this moment meticulously, applying the same precision he brought to his construction projects. Every detail had been accounted for, but no amount of planning could fully prepare him for what was about to unfold. A perfectly executed plan. Earlier that day, James had called his best friend, Daniel Harper, asking for help with an early concrete pour at a new project. Confident and eager, Daniel agreed without hesitation, seeing it as just another favor for his best friend. It was an opportunity to share stories and laughter, a simple task at the site. But for James, this was the moment to settle the score with the man who had betrayed him so deeply. James also invited his wife, Clara, to the site under a different pretext. He asked her to bring him some food, claiming it was a thoughtful gesture to ease his long night of work. Unaware of her husband's true intentions, Clara agreed, seeing it as a small way to reconnect with the man she had once loved. She had no idea she was walking into a trap from which she would never escape. The calm before the storm. Daniel arrived first, parking his car in the shadow of an unfinished structure. James' tools, bags of cement, steel rods, and buckets were scattered across the site, giving the impression of a routine night's work. Daniel greeted James with his usual charm, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath his friend's calm exterior. Moments later, Clara's headlights cut through the darkness as she arrived with the food. The aroma briefly masked the tension that was thickening in the air. James observed her approach with a neutral expression, but his eyes burned with suppressed emotion. For him, every step Clara took was another nail in the coffin of the life they had once shared. The three of them stood under the harsh glow of the construction lights, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing second. The confrontation. James broke the silence, his voice calm but chilling. He spoke directly to both Clara and Daniel, his accusations sharp and undeniable. The shared guilt between Clara and Daniel suddenly became palpable. Clara's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she grasped the magnitude of what James knew. Daniel, ever quick to react, tried to defend himself, but his usual charisma now seemed hollow and desperate. James remained unmoved, his calm demeanor only amplifying the tension, like the silence before a storm. As the confrontation escalated, James reached for a metal pipe nearby. His movements were swift, almost instinctive. Before Daniel could react, the first blow landed. The sound of metal striking bone echoed across the empty site, a brutal reminder of James's intentions. Daniel collapsed to the ground, his body crumpling under the weight of the attack. Clara screamed, her voice piercing the night, but James's fury was unstoppable. He turned to her, his eyes devoid of any trace of the man she had once known. The final act of betrayal. Clara pleaded, her words choked by tears, but James was beyond reason. Years of betrayal, sleepless nights filled with doubt, and a rage he had suppressed for too long finally erupted. His hands closed around Clara's neck. The act was deliberate and final. The struggle was brief, and soon the site fell silent once more. Only the distant murmur of the wind could be heard as James stood amidst the wreckage of his own life. James worked methodically, dragging the lifeless bodies to the edge of the freshly dug foundation. He started the cement mixer, its mechanical hum filling the air as he poured the mixture over the remains. The wet cement splattered and settled, its gray surface hardening into a cold, unyielding grave. James took a step back, his chest heaving from the exertion, but his expression remained eerily composed. The cement continued to settle, smoothing out as though nothing lay beneath it. The quiet hum of the mixer finally died, leaving the construction site in silence once more. The illusion of normalcy. For a moment, James stood still, staring at the ground as if trying to memorize detail of the scene. He knew that the life he had known was now buried beneath that gray, unforgiving slab. He gathered his tools, careful not to leave anything out of place. Every movement was deliberate, as if he were following a blueprint he had drawn up in his mind. The bags of unused cement were stacked neatly, The rods of steel left where they had been before the night's events. James took a deep breath, adjusting his jacket as he walked to his truck. His mind was still running with the same meticulous precision that had carried him through the night. He had already begun the process of crafting an alibi. By the time he reached his home, the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the sky. He showered, scrubbing away the dirt and sweat from the night's work, and changed into fresh clothes. When he emerged from the bathroom, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For the first time in years, he saw a man he didn't recognize, a man who had crossed a line he never imagined he would approach. But the same calm resolve that had carried him through the night returned, and he turned away from his reflection. The perfect alibi. Later that morning, James placed the call to report Clara missing. His voice was carefully rehearsed, conveying just the right mix of concern and confusion. He spoke of her dedication to their marriage, her reliability, and her predictable routines. He told the officer she had left the house the previous evening for an errand and never returned. His tone was steady, though he allowed a few cracks of emotion to seep in, just enough to make it believable. As the hours passed, James played his role flawlessly. He contacted family and friends, asking if anyone had seen Clara. He called Daniel's wife, expressing shared worry and offering to help in the search for his missing best friend. To the police and the community, James was a grieving husband and a concerned friend. He attended the vigils held for Clara, standing among the crowds with a carefully crafted expression of sorrow, even shedding a tear when the moment called for it. Cracks in the facade. But cracks in his facade soon began to emerge. Detectives noticed subtle inconsistencies in his story, small details that didn't quite align. The workers at the construction site mentioned the unusual timing of the concrete pour and James's insistence on working alone that night. The forensic team's discovery of Clara's wedding ring, partially embedded in the concrete, raised further questions. Surveillance footage from a nearby hardware store showed James purchasing additional supplies late on the night of March 4th, a detail that only added to the mounting suspicions. Despite the mounting pressure, James maintained his composure. His methodical nature and years of planning large-scale projects made him adept at handling stress, but the weight of his actions began to take its toll. He found himself replaying the events of that night, unable to escape the images of Clara's face or the sound of Daniel's final gasps. The world around him continued to move forward, but James remained trapped in that moment. His life had irrevocably changed. The arrest and trial. By mid-March, investigators had gathered enough evidence to obtain a warrant for James's arrest. On the morning of March 20th, police arrived at his home. James was calm as they placed him in handcuffs, offering no resistance. His neighbors watched in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile the image of the polite and hard-working contractor they knew with the man now accused of such horrific crimes. The trial began in September 2010, more than a year after James's arrest. By then, the case had captured national attention, with every detail of the murders and James's calculated actions dissected in the media. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and the courtroom itself was packed with spectators eager to witness the trial of a man whose story had become a dark urban legend. The prosecution portrayed James as a man consumed by cold, calculated rage. They argued that his actions were not impulsive, but meticulously planned, presenting evidence that painted a chilling picture of a man who had turned his precision and skill as a contractor toward committing murder. Photos of the construction site, forensic analyses, and testimonies from workers created a narrative of premeditation that left little room for doubt. The defense and verdict. The defense, however, took a different approach. They depicted James as a man driven to the brink by emotional devastation. They argued that the betrayal by his wife and best friend had pushed him into a state of uncontrollable anguish, suggesting that James's actions, while tragic, were the result of a temporary emotional breakdown rather than cold-blooded calculation. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with their verdict on September 15, 2010. James Donovan was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Clara's sister broke down in tears, clutching a friend for support. James showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs, but for those who had followed the case, there was no question that justice had been served. In the end, James Donovan's story served as a warning, a tale of how a life, once filled with promise, could be reduced to ashes by a single act of revenge. And as the years passed, the haunting memory of that fateful night would live on, carried through whispers and speculation in the town where it all began.